of that in this pandemic, where workers have allied with their consumers to get a different deal. We see that kind of cities and local government can step forward as well and think about, in this region, how is this going to be shaped? We've got some great examples of that. And then, of course, joining with the kind of enlightened business leaders I'm speaking of. But I think those are the three things that need to happen to really begin to kind of move forward. And we wouldn't expect to see it yet, but this is what needs to happen now.
And what will be the catalyst to make that happen? What will spur that change? Where does it come from? Does it come from government? Does it come from the private sector? Does it come from consumers, investors? Where does it come from? Deputy Prime Minister Joe?
Oh, I think it is going to come in part out of a value shift post-pandemic. I hate to use the term post-pandemic, because it may not be over yet, and it's certainly not over in certain parts of the world. But I think a lot of it's going to come out of necessity. In developed economies, we have record low levels of unemployment in a lot of countries, and employers can't get staff, and can't get staff in all sorts of businesses. Not just in one sector or the other sector. So it's going to be a change is often spurred out of necessity. So it is going to drive digitalization, automation, but also better terms and conditions for workers, because otherwise we won't have people. And I think that's what's going to make it happen, in my view. So political pressure from society that has reevaluated what essential work is and why it should be valued properly, but also the business case shifts in that favour as well.
Market forces.
Yeah.
Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. I think, where it comes from, I mean, as Hillary said, it's got to be, a new social contract, which is really a tripartite kind of thing, which is government, employers, and workers. And in that regard, I want to come back to this question of collective bargaining, because I think one of the things that emerged as a lesson from the pandemic is the key role that unions played in transforming the workplace during the pandemic. Those workers who had unions were better protected, more likely to have sick pay, more likely to be given time off to quarantine or isolate as required. And, so their experience of the pandemic was really quite different from those who didn't have those protections at work. Depending, some countries are more protective than others, but just as a general rule, and there's study after study that shows that. Just another one came out 2 weeks ago from the ILO. And I think transforming the attitude around collective bargaining, recognizing that bargaining is a social good, that safety and health committees don't really work unless you've got a union at the work site, although we would still advocate for safety and health committees, and that can go some way towards addressing a lot of the other features that are aligned with essential work, which is low wages, no social protection, variable schedules. I mean, that's a big issue. Violence at work is a big issue for commerce workers. We've seen such an upsurge of violence against retail workers, even shootings when they ask somebody to put on a mask in the United States. That's the extreme, but still it's a elevated risk for commerce workers everywhere, including across Europe, Australia. So I think recognizing that collective bargaining is a social good would be a key result from the pandemic we'd like to see.
And can you just give us a sense of whether you're seeing that taking hold in different countries? I think there are sort of mixed signals in the U.S. and elsewhere on the degree to which collective bargaining unionization is on the rise. What are you seeing?
Well, if you just wanted to talk about the U.S., I mean, clearly the Biden administration is the first one ever since FDR to recognize that collective bargaining is a good thing. I mean, we've never seen that before. So now translating that into actually, there's laws and practices and so on, it doesn't, necessarily happen with the snap of a finger, but he's really transformed the attitude about unions, and we're seeing record high positive ratings for unions among young people. It's like 70–80% of, so there in the United States, I think it's a special case where it's extremely hard to create a union. At the same time, the record high positive, polling data is up in the really high. So, and Biden's done a good job in creating that atmosphere. Elsewhere, I do think you're seeing that recognition across Europe in, less obvious ways because you don't have such extreme barriers to creating unions. But I think it's positive. Yeah.
Should we talk a little bit more about other government measures? A couple of you referenced some various initiatives in different parts of the world. A special minimum wage for care workers in Switzerland, is that right? I can't remember who said that.
Yeah.
And some measures in Ireland. I do want to get to investment in jobs and the social sector, but other than sort of spending massive amounts of money to kind of, boost certain sectors and hiring in certain sectors, what kinds of steps can policymakers consider or are being considered?
But can I say that actually the question is, how can we save massive amounts of money? Because I think what we need to understand is that low wage and, as you're saying, unpredictable work, which is the main thing, is extremely expensive. I've sat on a really interesting panel today about mental health. The costs of mental health from this kind of work are astronomical and are very often met by states as well as kind of people privately and individually. So that's a huge, huge problem, I think. So we can see that actually kind of not investing in work. In the UK, 1/3 of families with 2 people in work are in receipt of in-work benefits. This is because wages are so low that people need income from the state in order to survive. So this is a kind of direct transfer from the state to private companies, if you like, to subsidise those wages. So what we need a kind of fundamental I would say as a fundamental rebalancing of the economy. So I don't think we can just put this on the cost side. It's about a rebalancing, which we may find is on the saving side. Obviously, in my work, what I'm interested in is how do we flourish in this century, and this kind of work is not flourishing work. But I think that economic arguments are just as important.
There is a World Economic Forum white paper that I think is being published this week that argues that every dollar of investment in several social sectors, including healthcare and education, would deliver a multiplier effect of 2.3 times the initial investment. Is that a way to make change for essential workers and to address some of the working condition issues and wages? Does that kind of argument hold sway right now? Are governments going to do this?
I haven't read the white paper, so
You can't have read the white paper because it's not out until tomorrow, but they wanted me to ask
I didn't pretend to have read it. I would have been found out. But I'm always very sceptical of that Jack and the Beanstalk stuff. You put one euro into anything and all of a sudden you generate 7, whether it's culture, whether it's innovation, whether it's care work. So I'm always a bit sceptical of that kind of stuff. Like if that were true, sure, we'd be always putting this 1 euro into all these great things that generate 10 or 20. But having said that, might be skeptical about the numbers, but having said that, the principle I think is one that I would accept. And it's only common sense that if you've better public health and better health outcomes, that your economy and society is going to be better. If people are more educated, things are going to be better generally. And I think the point that was made earlier is true in terms of costs for government. Costs for employers is a different question, but in terms of costs for government, low pay and precarious work can be quite expensive for governments because the people who are working hard but getting paid poorly then need to turn to the government for family income supplement, for housing benefits, for a whole range of social subsidies and social protections that wouldn't be necessary if they were paid better, and we could then put that money into education and into infrastructure and other things. So there's a lot of moving parts.
That's why it's a white paper. That's good. Did you? You looked like you were going to
on the
jump
multiplier effect, I haven't read the paper obviously either, but I would just say there's a lot of data around a multiplier effect for investment in care in particular, especially with developing economies, because it enables more women to go into the labor market if there are care options and if those are decent. It tends to be a heavily female dominated occupations, especially like long-term care and child care. By creating investment in care brings more women into the labor market, which lifts the economy in general. So there's a lot of data around multiplier effects in that particular genre. And I think that we obviously demographically, we need more investment in care, whether or not there's a multiplier effect. That's just the reality. We need millions and millions of more jobs in care, and they need to be good jobs in terms of also, for the the humanity of we need to create good jobs, but also if we want to close a gender gap, that's a key strategy. I mean, if we're talking about gender equality, we've got to have investment in care.
That's true. Now, just complement what I said. There was a very good discussion actually this morning about this. So the key to unlock gender parity is childcare. It's not that complicated, but yet it's not done. And I feel, of course, very privileged for, having had raised my kids in Norway, which is, one of the countries I think that excels, right, in this, or Scandinavia in general. But again, it's not that complicated. The solutions, they are there. I think the intentionality sometimes is not. And it's sad.
But this again goes back to predictable work, because unpredictable work means no matter how great the childcare is, you can't access it. So everything kind of fits together. But yeah,
it's true.
From a private sector perspective, is there a value shift going on? Are the conversations in the boardroom more focused on some of the questions that are coming up here? How conscious is the management? How conscious is your board of directors of the pressures facing frontline workers and perhaps need to redress some of these questions?
So I would say workers in general, right? Not only frontline workers, but everyone. We're all being hit by the Great Resignation, right? So I think every company in whatever sector has seen this happening. So I think it was an eye opener. For us to look into more flexibility, to look into some of the things that we were demanding, I guess, from our employees, but there was probably, not necessary at all. I think one of the greatest silver lining of the pandemics, if I can even call it that way, is the fact that we proved the point that we can actually do a lot of those works, from everywhere. But of course, essential workers, agricultural workers, food and beverage workers, it's a little bit different, right? But I think we discuss on how we can make things more flexible for our employees, and I think what I'm seeing is also the discussion going beyond the borders of the company, right? So looking into our stakeholders again, or the smallholder farmers, the migrant workers, the female farmers. How can we build better business models, better solutions that help them as well, right? That shift I see in the discussion. Before it was more like, okay, let's have a digital tool and put that in the market and help farmers get knowledge. And now it's more like, okay, no, but wait a second, right? So let's talk about female farmers. There's a knowledge gap there. So how can we build better solutions for them? How can we attract more young people into agriculture? That's one of the biggest issues that we're going to actually face in the future. Today, smallholder farming is done by people between 40 and 55 years old. So no youngster wants to go into agriculture anymore. So how we're going to resolve that, right? So I think those conversations, they are becoming much louder inside a company like Yara and other companies that we work with as well.
So,
but
what works in terms of encouraging younger people to get into agriculture? Because we have a similar issue in Ireland. It's very hard to, the traditional model was, one of the sons would inherit the farm, and things change over time, and sometimes it's a daughter, but that's still uncommon. What strategies, or are there strategies that work in terms of encouraging young people to?
I guess we're all trying, right? We see technology as as something that makes agriculture very attractive. So I've recently been to a trip in India, and it was my first trip after the 2 years of pandemic, so I was very excited about that. And I traveled the country, met a lot of young farmers, and it's amazing to see how excited they are about technology. They want to see, even a farmer, like a smallholder farmer, very tiny farm, he loves the apps. They were proud to show me that they were using our apps. They want drones in their farms and so on. So it works. So technology is a way to attract young people into farming. It works, but it demands investment, right? Mm-hmm. It demands investments, because we have a lot of agri-tech companies working on this, but nobody's making a lot of money with agri-tech. Let's be honest. So it demands time and investment and resilience. But I think linking young people with technology, with agri-technologies, it's a good way to at least keep them in the farms and avoid them going, to the cities and do other jobs that wouldn't generate as much value as staying in the farm.
Can I ask one follow-up question too? Given the shortages that you've described, what's the wage situation like? Are you having to hike wages in order to attract enough workers in certain?
You mean in terms of the?
Are you seeing that kind of wage pressure play out in the sector?
Yes. I think, yeah. So we see that in every, I would say, parts of our company. So that, bargaining, right? Because people learned, and rightly so, that, right? They can do their jobs from other locations. There are enough jobs out there. So definitely. So we feel that pressure as well. And we try to, accommodate as much as we can. So we follow the market.
I wonder if we could go to the audience to see whether there are any questions here. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you could speak to long-term care and the care shortage and worker shortage. I'm from the US and Canada, and in particular, that was a problem over the past 2 years and is increasingly so.
I think that's a great question to ask.
I mean, I think those are jobs that are particularly bad jobs in general, in the sense that low paid, terrible hours, people feel just worn out from the stress of seeing, especially in long-term care, early in the pandemic, so many people died. Some of them were locked into the nursing homes, couldn't go home for months, couldn't see, their own family, or else they were sent home thinking they might be carrying a virus home to their own family. A lot of them were low-wage, immigrants living in close family environments. So you see both a question of a lot of people just, I need to do something else. There is that, but also they'll come back if the wages and the conditions are good enough. I think that's really just the question of quality of care, quality of work, an end to short staffing. The problem with having people leaving the occupation is also that it increases the burden on those who remain. It makes it even worse. So it's the care economy has to decide that they're going to treat these workers differently and pay them more and not have them working 2 and 3 different jobs, which was the case during the pandemic, which also aggravated some of the situations. So it's really got to be a transformed in order to attract people to come back into those jobs. I mean, they will come back. It's just they've got to be better jobs.
I mean, can I say a couple of things about this? I mean, I want to go back to this truth, which is that in technology revolutions, work changes and it takes time, but different work gets valued. So if we think about, the last revolution and mass production, when Ford introduced the production lines, it was called Forditis. He had 370% turnover, and gradually those jobs changed until they did become good jobs and they fueled, good lifestyles and people's kind of, lifestyles improved. So we need to see how we can tell. This is why when I say a different story, I don't mean something airy-fairy, that we need to have a completely different revaluing. And of course, everywhere we see this already happening at the margins. And the question now is how we move really exciting change that's happening in the world of care from the margin to the centre. So one example would be, the work of the Dutch organisation Boortzorg. Jos de Blok is here at Davos and he'll be speaking tomorrow morning. And, this is a way that, in the Netherlands, they've, not everybody is part of it, but they've reorganised carers into autonomous teams. There's no kind of, hierarchical management, community-based, huge emphasis on relationships, and they have, the pay is good because it's not an extractive economy. The money, there's no kind of layers of management and profit to be made. It's kind of all circulated within the community. The people remain in those jobs for a long time. Of course, the health and care of the people that are being cared for the outcomes are really, really good because the teams are stable, the relationships are there. So we can see how this can happen. It's not difficult, and it's not that the economy can't bear it. It's that we have to have different models, and part of the new story of care has to be how we move from a very extractive economy to a very regenerative economy. And we have small cooperatives. Again, digital is really important. In the UK, we have also these cooperatives that have come together in a very modern way, using digital technology to kind of work as small teams. They increase their wages. They have really strong relationships. They're tiny, they're not heard of because they're small and they're in kind of rural areas or whatever. But these models exist. And the question is how we understand them and how we grow them. And this has to be really important, because I do agree with you, but I don't think it can just be that, people eventually have to come back to that work because, like now we're starving and we're kind of, it has to be that the work is revalued. And we can see really good examples of where that's starting to happen.
I agree broadly with the points that are made. I think the solution probably, as is so often the case in two different areas. One is the better terms and conditions, and not just better pay, a proper career path, so that it's registered, regulated, there's lifelong learning. You can move up a ladder in a certain way, and that's quite important to people in employment. People will put up with a lot, actually, if they feel that if they work hard, they can advance. But I think in a lot of jobs, and care is one of those areas, it's very hard to move up because it's not a proper career path. And I'm not sure exactly how we do that, but I'm sure we can. The other area really is digital and modern technologies. So many more people can live at home for so much longer than was the case in the past, without necessarily the need for someone to visit them every day or twice a day. And that's wearables, it's remote consultations, it's all of those things. And when I dip into that space, speaking as a doctor as well as a politician, I'm so excited about what is possible and what might be possible in terms of wearables, patient monitoring, all of those things, drone deliveries, you name it. Like, so much more can be done, I think, to enable people to live independently and in their own homes for much longer than is currently the case.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Garrett-Cox from GIB Asset Management in the UK. So I'm really struck by Hilary's comments about how you've got to redefine essential work, because I think probably pre-pandemic we all had a view as to what that was. So who are the essential workers? I mean, I think my personal view is that we have a lost generation of our children who have been most hard hit from aspects of the pandemic. And so to what degree, actually, do we need to think a bit more holistically about redefining essential work as perhaps being some of the apprenticeship schemes that perhaps can be a bit forgotten? It's very easy to just sort of have a conversation with a business leader and say essential work and their eyes will glaze over. But how do you reframe the conversation in a way that actually you can take it to a different level and say essential work is actually providing opportunities for the next generation and equipping them with the resilience and tools that will enable them to make a difference in the future? Thank you.
I mean, can I say something? I think this is such a good question, because I think what is the goal here? The goal has to be how we come out of this creating flourishing societies in a new way. And if we look at, younger generations, Gen Z, they really are voting with their feet. They are not prepared to kind of undertake this work. They're not prepared to do work that doesn't have a kind of greater purpose. And so I think it is absolutely about bringing those ideas of flourishing and purpose and then widening the definition so that we all have this stake in it that is really, really important. I think that's absolutely, to the point.
I love what you say about apprenticeships, right? Because when you look into companies and how many times we demand perfect diplomas and an educational path, but at the same time there are so many people coming completely unprepared out of university, not ready to start working in companies or bringing the skills that we actually need. So, and I think apprenticeship is a fantastic way, of actually training them with the skills that actually can be used later in companies like mine or many others. So it is a bit a forgotten euro that we need to bring back. And companies play a role here into being more open towards that kind of skills as well, and not expecting the 3 MBAs, 2 masters type of candidate all the time.
Excellent point. Do we have any other questions? I think we've covered a great deal of ground. Do you want to
I just wanted to come back to your point about people living at home longer, because I think that when we think about care, when we think about, that's like the key feature of the care looming on the horizon is more people at home, but also needing some kind of what we call home care, so if somebody might come once a week or, for a few hours every other day or something like that. And so one of the big challenges, I think, for workers is how do we formalize that? Because in many countries, that's still very, very informal, and there's some kinds of payments, but how can we lift that up and make that more skilled and learn and have the technology engaged? So, and there are obviously, businesses that do that in some of the developed countries, and that is booming, and that's actually growing more quickly than nursing homes, for example, because it is what's on the horizon. But I do think for essential workers, those are also essential workers that could be engaged in that kind of caregiving, and there's a lot to do to formalize that work. We've just seen that happen in Peru, where they had all the home care industry become actually employees in a way that gives them better social conditions, and I think that better overall conditions, and that's something that we would be seeing happening more and more around the world, and a big challenge for those workers who are also predominantly women. And so it is another kind of foray into looking at gender equality and lifting that occupation up.
Well, listening to all of you, and thank you very much for your contributions, it feels as though we don't yet have a revaluing of essential work or even a redefinition of it coming out of the pandemic and in this recovery. But it does sound as though, this is a time of tremendous disruption in labor markets and also technological change. And there are several forces at play here that it sounds like will help to determine how any restructuring does play out. The power of market forces, and we see that in the influence of inflation, worker shortages, and the role of unionization, as well as consumers and investors pushing for change. So thank you very much for your thoughts today, and thank you to the World Economic Forum for having us. And that ends our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.